Hi, everyone. We'll give everyone a few more minutes to get logged in here and we'll get started. So stand by for 2 minutes. All right. Welcome everyone to this month's presentation on the Framework for Design Excellence, Design for Economy. We are excited today to have Michael, is it Lubbers? Is that correct?
That is correct.
And Matthew Christie from Gafari. Joining us today. I'm filling in for Matt. He had a prior engagement, so he can't be with us today. But as always, I do want to, of course, thank our chapter sponsors for making it possible for us to provide events like this. Some housekeeping, if you have questions during the presentation, if you could put them in the chat and I will politely interrupt or save them for dialogue at the end. But our speakers have indicated some polite interruptions are okay. So I will try to monitor that. And when it's pertinent to the topic, I will interject. But we will have some time for dialogue at the end as well. So with that, I will turn it over to you, Michael and Matt. Thanks for being here today.
Thanks for having us.
Stop share here.
Very much. Okay, I just want to make sure that everybody can see the first slide here.
And Andrew, it looks like there's a few more people waiting.
Right.
Yep, I am working on that right now.
Andrew, after that, can you confirm that you can actually see our deck as well, please?
Yep, I can see it.
Great.
All right, I just let everybody else in, so.
Awesome, great. Well, thank you everybody for attending today. My name is Michael Lubbers, and I'm Director of Design for Gafari. And with me is Matthew Christie, who is really my right-hand partner here at Gafari. He's a senior level designer in our office. So we're excited to present the Northpoint Bank Operations Center as part of this Design for Economy and AIA COTE series. So that being said, we're pretty conversational about the way that we handle presentations. So I don't want anyone to feel like they have to be overly polite. Please just go ahead and interrupt us as we go. We've got a fair amount of time to fill. So we're really gonna dive deep into this project. So just as a summary, I'm gonna get rid of this little menu bar here a minute. We'll just do a quick introduction about who Gafari is, because some of you may not be familiar with our organization. But in terms of agenda, it's really 3 parts. We're gonna look at Northpoint Operations Center as a building reuse. It's a transformation story. But that responds to one of the questions that have been set forth in terms of how do we provide abundance while living within our means? The second portion of our conversation this afternoon will be about building size and right-sizing the program. How will the design choices balance first cost with long-term value? At Gafari, we really pride ourselves in offering a workplace strategy to many of our commercial clients. We want to be involved in the success of organizations. We're not huge believers in just designing buildings that may sit empty when our clients fail. So we believe that we're along for the ride and helping share in their success. And the third part of our conversation is about material usage and editing your palette. How can the performance of a project be improved in ways that are cost and design neutral? So those are the three areas that we'll touch on today. So again, the two dudes you have in front of us, Mike Lovers and Matthew Christie. My background is that I was born in Western Michigan. I'm a graduate of Kelvin College, Bachelor of Fine Arts in Studio Art from Kelvin. And about 25 years ago, I moved to Chicago and had practiced there for about 23, 24 years before Gafari kind of moved their way into Western Michigan. So there's a huge opportunity for me to be able to spend more time back home. So I'm really proud to be here in Grand Rapids. It's been a dream of mine for years. And Matt, maybe a little bit about yourself.
I'm Matt Christie. I'm the current past president of AIA Grand Rapids. I'm originally from the east side of the state, went to Lawrence Tech for my undergrad, and then moved to Chicago to do my master's program at UIC in Chicago. Was in Chicago 10 years, and then once we had our first kid, that kind of forced our hand to move outside of the city of Chicago. So we decided to move back to Michigan. So we looked both sides of the state and ended up here in Grand Rapids. And I've now been in Grand Rapids about 6 years.
Cool. So just in general about Gafari, it was really born on the east side of the state. We've been in business for about 38 years. We've got all disciplines in-house, everything from engineering to design to process engineering to architecture. We've got 14 global offices and we've got a 42 country footprint. All of that really adds up to, it's just a really cool place to be in terms of having cultural influences, diversity, inclusiveness, and just an overall feeling for what's happening outside of Grand Rapids and having our eyes set on a bigger platform, which is exciting for us. One of our specialties is workplace design, along with a lot of commercial architecture. Aviation is a huge, huge niche for our company. Government and institutional, health and wellness, industrial and education. Gafari was really born in Detroit, where our founder, Yusuf, had offered to the Fords and the GMs the ability to take their hand-drawn real estate documents and have them digitized to CAD format. And this was many, many years ago. And what that did is it allowed Gafari's name to really be pushed into that really important industry and market in Michigan. So we've had a handle on tech from the very beginning at the outset of computer-aided design. So that's one of the basis of what makes Gafari so strong, is that technically we feel as if we're rooted in what's next. And again, like many of you, we bring a full array of planning and design expertise, everything from strategy to interior design, engineering, architecture, and technology. A lot of what we're going to talk about today is all about strategy. What I love about economy and design is we find these clients who are willing to take a risk, and those risks turn out to be something that actually blossoms into massive financial savings. But at the same time, Northpoint in particular is helping enhance communities. So there's really just nothing better than having clients that do this type of work. The one thing I want to do is just quickly push into a little bit of the post-COVID work environment. I'm sure you're probably all really tired of hearing about what's happening post-COVID, because we really aren't post-COVID yet, and nothing's really been proven. But to that point, we do share what our clients are doing and what they're saying and how they're operating today. The one thing we know for sure is that today's workplace is constantly changing. We thought that workplace design and real estate was changing as a result of the economy for many, many years. It was up, it was down, we expanded, we shrunk. No one knew that a pandemic or health would actually change the face of the workplace either. So we're just adding more and more dynamics into this conversation. So a little bit of our forecast in terms of our research and our feedback is that US workers want to return to the workplace while keeping the benefits of flexibility and access to privacy they've enjoyed while working from home. I absolutely adhere to this feeling. The pandemic absolutely changed my life in many ways. But 100 ways to Sunday, I miss my colleagues at work, and I want to be more intentional with the number of days I'm in the office and what I do at the office. We do hear that about 69% of CEOs are planning to downsize their office space. Recently, I'm not sure that that's so incredibly true. So what are the changes that we see moving forward? And there's kind of a purpose to this, and we'll pop into Northpoint here in a moment. You've all heard the word hybrid ad nauseum. We first just thought that was an automobile, but now it's our workforce. We're looking for this mix of being in the office to be productive, but we choose home for the convenience and safety. The hybrid work environment obviously combines both. Workplace ecosystem, where offices become spaces for intentional connection. I don't think I've used the word intentional and authentic more than I have in the last year. Obviously, we'll need to come up with something new next year, but I think understanding why we're in the office and why we need that real estate has become a huge question that we're really enjoying kind of diving into with our clients. But the big one that we really want to talk about today, and how this points to, Northpoint, is the idea of decentralization. We're hearing that by 2022, leaders intend to embrace geographic diversity by offering more flexibility and reducing the risk of disruption. And for Northpoint, what that meant was they would actually look at their headquarters. And for those of you who know Grand Rapids, they are in their headquarters is located at the kind of the intersection of the East Belt Line and 96. There's not a ton that's walkable right around that area. I don't want to say anything negative, but I wouldn't call it pedestrian friendly. I would call it car friendly. That being said, their headquarters stands proud and tall on that corner, and it is fairly new. But what they discovered pre-pandemic, and this was probably in the fall of 2019, they were expanding at such a rapid pace. They really do a lot of different types of loans for homes. So Northpoint is really just kind of this loan monger of an organization where they buy and sell loans, but then they are also really your mortgage central. So that being said, they were growing in leaps and bounds, but little did they realize that throughout the pandemic, they would grow as much as they did. So what they decided to do was take a chance and search for property. And they landed about 2.5, 3 miles to the southeast, on the southeast side near Cascade, for what they wanted to create an operations center. They first believed that this would be an adjunct facility to their headquarters, a place that would be a little bit more back of house, where really their brain trust, their servers, really just that hub of everything that would run the company, and a little less front facing. But the really cool thing is the pandemic shaped them in a way that they realized quickly that, wow, we're growing at 200, 300%. We need a facility that will attract talent. And what does that mean? And we were able to step in and help them with that.
And this decentralization also helped them with redundancies with their security of information and data as well. Right. So that was kind of another driving force.
Yeah, they were completely able to revamp how they stored paper documents versus an entirely new server for the entire organization. They have about, I believe, 800 to 900 employees across the entire United States and several facilities. So this really was just the start of the work in Grand Rapids. So that being said, here too, I think of this area as kind of the 28th Street Mire. It's this retail corridor, and I'm not saying that this is walkable friendly, but it's far more than what's happening over on East Beltline and 28th Street. So the operations center is the former Cascade Commons, and you may all remember this, and we'll have plenty of photos to talk about. You may remember this as the former design center, more in the decorative style architecture from the early 80s. That just it is essentially a big box. It has sat nearly vacant for about 10 years and really not doing anything for the surrounding residences and community. They took a chance and bought this building. They wanted to be the landlord. They wanted to be the #1 tenant. But they found very quickly it's directly adjacent to the YMCA. It's walkable. It's walkable to Mire. It is walkable to what were intended to be some of the outlets at Mire, or the outlots near Mire. So, you know, eventually this entire site will become more and more developed over time, and not to mention all of the traveling that they do. It's very close to the airport. So it offered the opportunity for anyone in their headquarters to be able to get out of the office. So one of the requirements for this new hub was it was kind of the HQ2 for them. It was a chance for people to get out of the office, plug in, and work elsewhere. So on that note, what we believe is going to remain constant in workplace design is, you know, regardless of how much you're going to be in the office or at home, workers are still going to demand focus. They're going to demand collaboration. We're still going to want to learn, and people need people. We're social beings. We're still going to need socialization in the office. But what we're hearing so much about is, now that we've all been working from home for, you know, almost 2 years, I was kind of joking with, not joking really, with a potential client this morning that what I enjoyed about working from home is that I could pop out over lunch and mow my lawn. And really only a West Michigander can say that. But I think it's cool to be able to have that time and that efficiency. But that was rejuvenation for me. I could get away from my computer, get some of that bright sunlight, and get some fresh air. So how do we replicate those types of stories with pulling people from home in a way that says you can be intentional about being at the office, but we're still offering that level of quality at the office? So what it does is it forever changes that office landscape. So what does that mean? It balances out high energy, engaging work periods with time of restore and renew. And I would say that that's what home did for me. I loved that I no longer had my commute from Holland to Grand Rapids. That, like I said, I could pop out, get my mail, take a walk. It was good, right? So how do I now replicate that in the office? So I think moving on to really our first section in this conversation today, you know, let's just kind of take a look at an overview of the building reuse story, this transformation story of Cascade Commons that is now Northpoint Operations Center. I just want to make sure I open that up. If there are any questions at this point, please feel free to ask. And then I think Angela will just jump in and interrupt me.
Nothing in the chat currently.
Okay, cool. So let's just keep rolling forward here. I think to that end, Matt, if you just want to introduce, we're going to show a video here I just want to make sure, did we turn the sound on?
We'll find out soon enough. Yeah, so this video is really a way for us to explain our process, and specifically for this Northpoint Operations Center, and really how do you embrace big in these kind of
embracing big box
and kind of these properties that we're very familiar with that have kind of been left for dead and underutilized, and how can we introduce scale modifiers to bring the scale of big down to an appropriate scale for the purpose that we're kind of injecting into these spaces. So if you could just hit play, we can.
Yeah, Andrew, if you could do me a favor, I'm just going to play a little bit of this and then I'm going to stop it. I just want to make sure that everybody can hear it on your end. So just give me one second.
Late in 2019, Gafari created a roadmap for the transformation of Northpoint Bank's Operations Center. This became a vision for adapting a former big box retail center into a workplace of the future. Embracing Big is our immersive design process for the new Operations Center. Northpoint Bank set upon a mission to decentralize their headquarters by 2022. Their goal? Embrace geographic diversity while offering more flexibility and reducing the risk of disruption. Northpoint's headquarters is located just 5 miles from the downtown core. The Operations Center is strategically located near the airport, retail, and the YMCA. Cascade Commons, a dated, big box retail design center, was to become the future of Northpoint Bank. Gafari and Northpoint recognized the bones, the location, and the connection to Michigan's great outdoors was well primed for transformation. Embracing Big is Gafari's process of using scale modifiers to align human experience and workplace architecture inside large volume spaces. The transformed exterior facades are a mere preamble to an intensive interior scale modification. With memorable first impression to a light-filled work cafe, the Operations Center offers a variety of choices for work styles and social interaction, while also providing abundant heads-down and meeting space. The modification, or arcade, offers human scale and familiarity to the large volume space, while also serving as a unifier connecting people to physical space. The Northpoint Operations Center is a creative transformation of an undiscovered Grand Rapids treasure. It boasts human-focused qualities and forges a future path for authentic workplace offerings in West Michigan. Late in 2019.
Just 1 second there. Okay. So that was just a quick kind of preamble of why we did what we did. I'd say from an architectural design standpoint and how we embraced the big box ideal, but made it human focused. Obviously, these design centers and these big boxes are now kind of littered throughout the country. What gets us excited about this is Northpoint was able to see this as a huge asset. And where we start to talk about value is understanding that they were able to acquire this building and turn it into an incredibly beautiful project and spend roughly half what they would have to build ground up. And I think what was cool is that everyone from day one saw something really special about what we affectionately call the turtle. Looks like a turtle head poking its head out on the north elevation. So I kind of want to have Matt talk a little bit about his first impressions too, and where we originally saw inspiration in this thing.
Yeah, certainly, the existing conditions are kind of grim, but the idea of the embodied energy that is here and the opportunity to leverage that as both a cost savings to the client as well as a sustainable way to bring life to this building that kind of has been left for dead for over a decade was kind of exciting starting point for the project. The other kind of thing that we were quickly drawn to was that kind of arcade space that offered a way for us to organize all the office spaces through this open area. Sure, kind of aesthetically, as we arrived on site originally, it's kind of a very dated look, but the opportunities of kind of sight lines and connection and even security of kind of having eyes on the streets and in connection to entry points was also kind of a benefit for Northpoint as well.
And Northpoint Bank is squarely focused on people, and whether that's their internal level of expertise and their staff, or it's their customers. This was not a customer destination, but what they wanted to be able to do was to express that brand immediately upon entry. So let's kind of just push away the idea of your front door and a canopy, and let's embrace the idea of the welcoming and really getting a sense of what a program is before you even enter into the building. So our initial feeling toward Cascade Commons was, of course, we're going to hack this building up, and of course, we're going to make it more transparent, but we're going to really capitalize on natural light. Number one, because natural light is healthy, and that's something that we knew was going to be an attraction to get people back to work. But on top of it, it's a big box. And the biggest test was once we started hacking away, the client believing Matt and I that once we start hacking, we would pull light from every direction. And Matt touched on it. The client knew from the very beginning that this massive skylight that really is this datum that follows this center path down the former design center with all of this beautiful detail was something where we knew we'd replace this skylight and we could build this incredible work environment. But some of the big questions you ask yourselves are, first, what am I going to feel like working in a space that has volume like this? How am I going to control sound? Maybe I don't want to see all the way through the building. What are the types of interventions we can create that help start to break this down and make this feel more human per today's standards, per today's well-building standards, focus squarely on human scale and human experience, not about selling products. So there's just a lot of this kind of Palladian decorative architecture that scared everyone in the beginning. But I think for everyone in the audience, you can immediately see this very quick ability to just blast away at this wall and start bringing this light in. That's a really fun part for me in a project, is to be able to just very, very quickly go from what is it to the wow. The whole idea of, Matt, you said this best this morning, that we've taken that kind of gable shape and said, okay, so what if we actually start to shrink that shape and replicate it rather than create something entirely new? How do we start to do that? So some of the first imagery we created was this idea of a portal, and we're calling it now a scale modifier, to say, how do we take this really tall ceiling element down to something that human beings can relate to, something that feels more inviting. Of course, the materials are going to help. Of course, the color and contrast is going to make this much more tactile and inviting. But for me, there's something very important for an organization that focuses so much on their people and home, a home-like quality, that you need to be able to experience that in person. I think just some of the construction photos, this is where we got so excited early on, is when they really started to hack away at this building, and you could just immediately start to see this natural light flood into this building. They started to build, we called it the arcade, but kind of the portals from the exterior. it just was the most enjoyable process. We worked with Vista Brothers Construction on this, and we did a lot of mock-ups to understand the scale and the color of this arcade, and then what that would start to be, really every week of the process as we started to kind of replicate that shape and that scale throughout this kind of concourse area. And then you could start to see how the natural light would flood through as well. But we really needed this portal as kind of this conduit to allow us to not only bring our lighting down to a human scale level, but to also kind of organize some of our HVAC, but to also kind of create this skeleton that heads down spaces can be built in as well. And we'll see more of that as we kind of go through some of this imagery. It's kind of another image here of the arcade and process.
And one of the other challenges when we were working with the client on a programming side of things is, with a big box, is how do you create intimate grouped spaces that allow workers to remain heads down where they need to be heads down and not allow kind of a larger volume to impact their focus. And so kind of these zones of kind of collaboration allowed us to break that scale down even further and create kind of pods of team focus areas.
Right, that's a good point, because a lot of what Northpoint does and their staff does is they have to stay very, very focused on their computer screens, because they're just dealing with documentation, digital documentation. All of their groups are slightly different. They have everything from customer service to capital programs where they are watching the markets to literally processing loans. So they needed to be heads down in a way that they couldn't be interrupted. And one of their biggest fears was everyone walking through all of these areas, would they be distracted? So that was kind of a mix of taking this arcade and letting it be something that would create a little bit more of that privacy and minimize those distractions as well. Let's see what else we have here. Just some more imagery of the project, and you can start to see how from really that main entry, we built upon that idea of a portal and pushed that shape all the way through this arcade. So from the main entry to, we'll show another image here of the reception area or the welcome area, to this open office zone, where that purity of form that I think is just so beautiful about just keeping it simple and starting to break up the open office zones, and then pushing all the way through to the south side of the building that you can see from the East Belt Line to, there's this little bit of a forested area with a retention pond that they've done a great job cleaning up and making it much more accessible. So it's just this reminder all the way through the building. So this is a shot of really what you'd see at the main entry. And we'll talk a lot about the materiality, the idea of warmth, and why we did what we did. But again, here too, you can see this massive interior skylight that really runs the entire distance of this centralized arcade. This is an image of their work cafe, which has a lot of different choices for stand-up tables, bar height tables, really just kind of staring out into the exterior to more traditional four-tops as well. Just a little bit more imagery of the open office, the arcade structure. You can see the acoustics on the side. You saw a lot of this in the video, but really just the way we thought through the project and being very thorough and intentional with how we replicated the gable shapes and what that meant to being purists about you experience it immediately upon entry, and how do we push that almost like it's a greenhouse within a much larger building through the building. And it's a kind of a scaled down version. But what I love about these graphics is it really starts to show this idea of the skeleton and really this kind of centralized feeling of this is the magnet that starts to allow us to build these heads down spaces, training spaces, offices within, and allow us to kind of populate some open office within it in training and cafe. And this is just some more of that imagery that you can see there. And then just some of the detailing that we included so that we can carry on with this idea of warmth, of wood and variety of spaces. I'll tell you that the reaction that we're getting to the space is they've had several of their staff say that they feel like they're walking into Meyer Gardens every day to work. They do feel like they're at home, and we'll explain more why this at-home feeling is important and how we accomplish that. But here too, really just kind of replicating the idea of what is it about Michigan that's special to all of us? And I think that we kind of go back to this idea of forests and beaches and seasons, and bringing that whole feeling into one space is what really helped us make it feel healthy. And when you're inside the space, you would have no idea that this building was built in the early 80s. And the exterior starts to show that as well. And then just kind of a final view here of the southern end of the building, which is their main work cafe. They do have three, but this is the main one where there's a lot of flexibility in between their boardroom to training areas to their work cafe itself. So they have the ability to have the entire organization spill into this space together, which they've never been able to do in one space. So before we move on, do we have any questions to this point?
Nothing in the chat.
Okay, cool. So I think the second portion of the conversation here is talking about building size and right-sizing the program. The way that we work through stepping back and discovery with our clients is talking about real estate resiliency. I know that we all talk about resiliency a lot, but it has to do with, how does the future of workplace contribute to a real estate strategy? I think a lot of those strategies were just blown up over the last 2 years and had to be completely rethought. I think initially everyone thought everything needed to shrink once the pandemic hit. But the funny thing is real estate footprints have been shrinking for years and years and years. So this is really nothing new. It's just that there were a lot more leases available. So even before the pandemic, we were talking about resiliency, and it's not just about making things smaller. It's about making them better. If we think about what's happened with the workforce today, they are asking for everything that they have at home. They want their kitchens, they want their living rooms, they want their bedrooms, and they really want their pets. They want all of this stuff at work now, which makes perfect sense. We have been talking about, your world shouldn't change so much from going from home to work far before the pandemic. I think the pandemic has just made it much, much, much more real. You need to be able to bring your lifestyle to work. That's what the workforce is looking for. I don't, go home and spend my entire night in the kitchen. I fluctuate between my living room, my basement, my second floor, my garage, my garden, right? You want to be able to do the same thing at work. I think what everyone really does not like about the office is it signifies I go to my workstation and I sit there all day long. That's not going to work, right? So when we start to design for resiliency, sure, we can make those footprints smaller, but if we make the footprint smaller for our heads down space, we need to make sure that we're providing choices throughout an office environment to be able to say, I've got a work cafe, I've got a lounge, I've got outdoor spaces, I've got a lot of different meeting room choices, and I have spaces now where I can close the door if I don't feel safe. And I think that that's a very common conversation that we're having today. So prior to the pandemic, we had been talking about square footage per person. back in 2013, this really was kind of the scale of where our world was going in terms of square footage per employee. I can be honest and say that, I was doing work in Indianapolis that was already 130 square feet per person. And that was literally 4 years ago with a tech organization. They were not all on top of each other. They just had less of a footprint for their heads down, and they had more social area. So we were really working with about 150 square feet per person. And we'll kind of show you here where we ended up with Northpoint. We were just over this for this facility, and we designed this during the pandemic. So they really stayed full force on this project all the way through 2020. They knew that they would probably never have their entire workforce back in the office all at once, but they also knew they were growing at a pace that they needed to sustain and be able to still have space for everyone to work. So this is really close to the final plan, the way the project has been built. We originally looked at some blocking and stacking for them because I just want to double check. I think this is where, yeah. So this is really where they purchased this building thinking that it would be a multi-tenant building. It sat nearly vacant for years and years and years, but the state of Michigan did have a Department of Human Services office within this building. So they were able to maintain that office as a tenant, and that does actually remain today. So they were able to lease about 13,000 square feet of this building for another tenant. And that's great because what it does is it drives revenue for the project. So it brings the cost of their building down even farther. Further built into that pro forma that they had for themselves, they were looking for really the third tenant besides themselves in the state of Michigan, which is about an additional 20,000 square feet in the upper right-hand corner here. Strategically, they played this very, very well. And that's how we started to look at where these tenants were located and then where Northpoint Bank would locate all of their people. So we knew we wanted them on center axes, but do we have tenants on both sides of them? So this is the way it played out. Interestingly enough, they are loving the space so much that we are about to begin work on moving even more of their people to this upper right-hand corner, an additional 20,000 square feet. So their workplace strategy was all about stepping back and asking bigger questions about technology, about culture, and about health and well-being of their people, rather than just saying, all right, Mike and Matt, we've got 30 people in this department, we've got 40 people in this department, and we have this much growth, draw it. It's not the way the project went at all. It had to be completely fluid, and we had to be protective of additional space. And sure enough, they're going to be growing into this portion of the building as well. So that's been a pretty cool process to see, is that they got it, right? So you'll see from the plan too, that there isn't a single private office on an exterior wall. Like I said, they're very people focused. So that idea of right to light and wellness is that everyone can experience natural light in this building. It's a big box. It was very dark, kind of in these zones here. So all the private offices were pushed to an interior point of view, but there's no lack of view from any of those offices. Obviously, there's a huge skylight that runs the entire north-south direction of the building that floods the space with natural light as well. So just a little bit of diving into what that workplace strategy looked like. What I had mentioned was we, rather than just going through and do a quantitative review and a prediction of what the future may be for them, we do step back and we look at their business and operational alignment, real estate, technology, people, and wellness. We absolutely believe that well-rounded approach to our work puts us on a trajectory of success with the clients. It's a better understanding of their business, more than just the quantity of people. So that looks at globalization, technology, well-being, real estate optimization, people and management, and culture. You know, the reason we do that is because, you know, we can go back to these conversations that there really is a generational divide in the workplace. You know, we're looking at 5 generations in the workplace. There's a ton of noise out there and conflicting research. This is what an office should be, and this is what Gen X wants. This is what Gen Z wants. You know, this is what the baby boomers need. But, you know, culture alone impacts the viewpoint of the design. That's really a lot of where Northpoint started. You know, stereotyping has become a real issue when provisioning the workplace, and then let's focus on the nature of the work. So that's a big part of how we approached what's happening in the workplace. And we do this with all of our clients. We think stepping back is everything and not just diving in and creating a spreadsheet. That's the worst thing you can do. A lot of the findings that we get out of these conversations we have with these clients is looking for equality. What is collaboration? It's one of the most overused terms there is out there. You know, breaking down the silos to encourage people to work together, and how do you design a facility to do that in natural light? Matt, you know,
I was just saying the idea of equality and right sizing of offices also leads to flexibility and resilience by creating standardized sizes of offices that provides flexibility, whether it's an office one day, it's a focus room another, or a conference room. So
yeah, we like to lead our clients through more of a modular approach. I personally think that one of the worst things you can do is tell your clients, this is what everyone else is doing, therefore you need to do the same. No, what you can do is provide that as a frame of reference, but then you really need to look at who is Northpoint Bank. So what we do is we like to think of the work, you know, the early work in the project that we call really our discovery phase, is building a roadmap. And these are just some snapshots of pages from the actual roadmap that we created for Northpoint. And this is kind of their real estate strategy for not only the operations center, but who they are. So we go through sessions that we record this information so that we can go back and really check ourselves and say, okay, Gafari, are you serving this client appropriately? The client can go into the roadmap and say, hey, you know, we talked about this early on and you're not doing it. So it's a good form of checks and balances, but it's also a chance for us to really bring all of their groups and their departments and build trust. So we go through everything from priority sessions and talking about must-haves and wish lists to visioning sessions where we have an executive session where, you know, you ask all the big questions about what defines success. But then what we do is we really want to have some fun. I know many of the firms out there, you do very similar things, all about this level of facilitation to help define what work looks like and what meetings may look like, what social spaces may look like, and what brand looks like. And the fun thing about this is our clients remember these activities. They remember images that they point to say, hey, you know, we want to look like that. And that's where I believe it's okay to be able to say, hey, this is what's happening out there, but take a piece of it and further understand what that might mean for you. The cool thing about the process with Northpoint was we were able to extract this feeling of what is it that's going to bring people back to the office? What's going to make them feel safe? What's going to make the space feel healthy and comfortable? And that idea of bringing you home was important to them. And what does home mean? What we were able to extract from conversations with them is something to do with Michigan. And one of the things I love about Michigan is we're also proud of our state. We're proud of our seasons. We're proud of our landscape. I grew up on the lakeshore, and there's nothing I love more about our beaches and our dunes and our forests. So to them, everything from that feeling of tree canopies to tree color and wood to mosses and tones, we try to build all of that into this experience of what are you feeling when you walk into the space. One of the things that Matt brought up here a moment ago was how do we walk through the right sizing of hard wall spaces and workstations and what have you to help build in that efficiency. Well, what we've developed over time is the idea of planning modules where we know we can say to our clients, well, we see the corporate office environment moving to less and less private offices, but if you have them, let's build on a module of say 10 foot by 12 foot. You know, and here are a couple of examples that might work from a furniture standpoint. But, you know, day two, that could be a huddle room or a small conference room, or it could be a flex video room, or vice versa. So it's our job to make sure that those types of spaces are outfitted from an AV standpoint to make sure that they can switch that furniture in and out. I'm not saying that that's easy, but it's a lot easier than ripping the walls out and building new. The cool thing about that 10 by 12 dimension is that it's so easily divisible to create focus rooms. So those become 6 by 10 spaces. And especially today, you know, there are days where I don't want to be around people and I'd love to be able to close a door and just have this tiny little kind of closet space. But, you know, that scales up to 12 by 12s, 12 by 15s. So using that modular approach helps build in that math of getting to more of 150 square feet per person so that the smaller we can create these spaces but make them perfectly acceptable for the clients allows us to build in more space for social interaction, collaboration, you know, corners that I can go around and kind of hide from everybody and do my heads down work so I don't have to be in my office, right? So
yeah, and in the case of Northpoint, they knew eventually they were going to need X number of private offices, but not right off the start. So we built in huddle rooms instead, where we knew that, hey, in 2 years, 3 years, they're going to need private offices, and it's an easy way for them to
their
grow
program,
into their space.
I mean, I'm sure you've all been through it, where the program changes. You'd love to get sign off. After all of this research and after all of this work, you'd love to get sign off early on, but it just never happens. But this was epic in proportions. Every time we met with them, we would have more private offices or conference rooms or huddle rooms to add. But we really do build in the math behind it so that we kind of build in these sliding scales of where we believe a client needs to be in terms of bleeding edge, perhaps unassigned workspaces to best practice, tried and tested. And then we build in this kind of sliding scale of, you know, how much and how many once we determine what our client really needs to be. So, you know, we did find that Northpoint was kind of in this leading edge that they would be 100% assigned, but there were some elements of their space that, you know, would they be 150 square feet per person, which we'd consider bleeding edge in Grand Rapids, Michigan, or would they be more toward 200 square feet? So we found them to be about 196 to 198. We actually were less than that. But what that does is it actually helps us kind of build in some ratios for how many focus spaces we need, you know, how much collaboration space do we need? So for example, that 1-to-1 ratio just simply means for every single person that has a heads down seat within the office, there's one additional seat that they can escape, whether it's a conference room, social space, lounge, cafe, that they have an alternative choice. And that's really important to build in. Huddle spaces, you know, what have you. So we build those ratios into the math. So as much as I talk about quality of space and asking the bigger questions, I personally love putting these statistics and metrics in here and seeing how they start to influence, you know, how many seats we'd actually have within these facilities. And what I love about my office here in Grand Rapids is this group of designers has just embraced this idea of having a strong backup for why we do what we do. And I think that that's really cool. You say something?
I was just going to say it's math magic.
So that being said, we put together a recipe, and we really came to a goal of about 170 rentable square feet per staff, but really hitting on that one-to-one staff to seats requirement. And we came really close to hitting that. Some of the tools we used, and I'm sorry if I'm boring everybody, but I just want to show you how we go about extracting this information. We use just simple interactive PDFs, and I'm sure you've all done this, but we just try to ask some cultural questions, some quality questions, along with, how are private offices assigned today? Why do you have one? We just had a client ask us this week, well, why do we even have private offices? I'm like, well, there are two reasons. It's either hierarchy, or you have private meetings several times a day where you can't run out of your office quick enough to get to a focus room. Those are good reasons to have private office. Even if it's hierarchy, we're not going to argue that that's a culture of an organization. So what that does is that builds into kind of that quantitative format. This is still part of the roadmap. It shows how big and how much. We get to the future predictions so that, again, we can go back to this document and edit. With the case of Northpoint, it was being edited on a weekly basis. So the results, as we go back and test our metrics, our planning efficiency really became about 180 square feet per person. There were definitely some nerves over time with COVID, spreading things out more, giving people a little bit more space. Originally, this is our capital markets program. There's a ton of natural light down in this area, but we originally had 5-foot wide benching stations, and I know that probably sounds scary to a lot of people. Those were increased to 6 feet wide, which is, more typical. So that being said, our averages went up a little bit. Our seat planning ratio, they're about 1.27 seats for every single person. So we're still above that 1-to-1 without being completely out of sorts and beyond what the market is doing. So again, I think we're currently at about 4:30, so we've got plenty of time. Are there any questions, anything anybody wants to bring up at this point?
Something just in the chat.
Why did Northpoint opt to renovate versus building a new building? And how did they react when they first walked into Cascade Commons?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So the CEO had an inclination that he could spend far less with renovating this building. He was worried, with any older building and renovations, you don't know what little problems are going to be hiding. But he was right. This was close to less than half what they would have paid for a ground up structure. We looked at this is about a 92,000 square foot building. And we did the project for about $88 a foot. And that is everything outside and in. Like I said, I practiced in Chicago for years, and we were dealing with 130, 120. So $88, $90 a foot, that is the number that Tom Tooley and I quoted them in our first interview, and it came out right to that number. Call us lucky or just call us, we know what we're talking about. It turned out to be just that. You take that number and you compare that to a new build, you add in property costs, you can very easily see that as half the amount. But the value in what they saw was they weren't just picking any site in Grand Rapids. They picked a site that was closer to people's homes. They picked a site that added value to that neighborhood and that community. And that's where the value of this project skyrocketed. I can say I walked into Cascade Commons with them and some of their board the very first time we walked in, and they were terrified. And, the CEO and his right hand kind of laughed. And from the very beginning, we knew we had a great story on our hands. So the reaction was one of fear, but then, you kind of walk through a space, and I love to do just kind of a lot of hand motions and then walking through space. And we could do this here, we could do this here. And we got into this very engaging conversation of where do we start to hack away at this existing building? And they got so excited about it. And it was all over from there. So they knew they had bought a great asset. So part of the first portion of the project was proving that this could be their new home. And they did it. So yeah, the reaction wasn't, it wasn't all flowers and balloons and birthday cakes. It was more one of, well, Gafari, help us prove it. So any other questions? Okay, so let's move into material usage so we can have maybe 15 minutes toward the end. If there are any more questions, we can get into some more discussion. This is a pretty light section. I'll see if I can't get it to advance. Just to give you a sense of how we understood the value of Cascade Commons, one that, some of the easier interventions to make are, hey, you've got some existing brick and some existing stucco. What can we do that's both economical and sustainable? Because, I really didn't want to go to them and say, wow, we need to clad this building with all new metal panel, and we increase the carbon footprint by making all this crap. And what we can do is just paint this thing, just paint it white, brighten it up. I always joked with one of my partners in Chicago. Etta was a project that we did together, and we did some of our best work at some of the bars we were at late night when we were together, and we just said, okay, let's just blast it with white, and what happens? So I know that sounds really easy, but I'm a big believer in renovations. I'm a big believer in using the palette that's been given to you. And how do we champion that? So in the upper left-hand corner here was this orange brick that we all know and love, along with some surrounding stucco and the green mullions. I'm totally into, green and maroon mullions these days. I think all of this stuff is still really cool, but it's not something that feels welcoming to them anymore. It feels old. So we just looked at options. Do you paint the building black? But to me, that's a heat sink, right? And gray to me is just blah. So how do we just come out of the bag swinging? So we did. We just, like you guys, we just went into Photoshop and we just started plugging away. And we showed them examples. We had to prove everything. We do a lot of visioning with images at Gafari, but the team that I work with, we absolutely believe that we need to solve first, improve it later. So we really try to do one before the other, but we've got to prove everything. We've got to prove that people are doing this stuff, and we do. It's simple. I think the fun part, and Matt had such a huge role to play in this, is how do we push the boundaries of a big box building and find a way to make it striking, make it inviting, and completely change that language of what a big box is. And I think he came out swinging with these ideas of opening this thing up and building this portal. Anything you'd add to that?
Yeah, materials obviously were kind of a key driver, both outside and inside. The idea of placemaking and kind of being excited to arrive, at your office space. So this portal both was kind of an echoing of that arcade that's within, and it also, happened to speak to what they do as a company. I'm not big into using shape to, reflect what they do, but it happened to speak to home, and I think we'll probably talk about interior materials next, but the idea of taking the outside and bringing it inside from a material standpoint too, to have that kind of experience of place.
So we had talked early on about the importance of early engagement. A lot of materiality to me is finding a way to keep it simple so that the client isn't overspending. We're not using a ton of materials, and one of the ways that we can find that character, and I think you saw in some of the earlier images from the interiors of the project, is the interiors is very simple. It's just white and a black arcade, and then we find, ways to insert imagery. We built on this idea of Michigan forests and exploring Lake Michigan. And this was the imagery that, we developed with the workshops that we did with them. And we were able to put that together into a palette. And, we call it early engagement because most of their staff saw this work. They were the ones that chose the ideas of Michigan forests and exploring Lake Michigan. Other ideas were geometry, color, and, it just didn't fly with them. It was when we were able to show how this idea of bringing you home could be applied to, the feeling of people, to the idea of our lakeshore, the idea of forests, that made sense to them, and that it helped us build a color palette as well. So as we started to walk through the building, we said, okay, we keep our materiality really simple in most of the building because we're embracing what's happening outside. That's a big part of your palette. But where do we start to have these touches or these moments where we're spending a little bit more of our design dollars to project this imagery that can be changed over time? And this is how we started to communicate that with them. But it got dizzying at some point where, like I said, we were really looking at having their staff vote, and they did. So we started with the idea of abstract forests and water. This was really where I wanted them to go, where it was less literal and more about kind of this subconscious feeling of what water and forests were all about. And this is the way we rendered everything and really the color tone that we started with. But what we built into was a little bit more sense of reality with a second option, and then hyper reality. And I'd say, where they landed was option 3. And I think one of the things I feel like I'm always learning, it's just, when we put this hyper realism together, I never dreamt that they'd choose it. And so I think one of the things to learn from this is just that, everything that we as designers put out there, we have to be ready for the clients to choose and to build. And we were, and we think this is amazing. But the one thing that here I am, little Mr. Architect thinking, oh, these geometries are all so cool and all this color would be great. What does our client relate to? They relate to the sense of realism. And I think that was a huge learning experience for us. And then just the way some of that was applied, it was symbolic through kind of the scrim that we created with the vertical wood, but then just the printing of a digital wall covering with some of these scenes in their interview rooms, in their conference rooms. All of their conference rooms and interview rooms had names for lakes throughout Michigan. And then just some of that, again, some of that final imagery. And you can see here that the materiality is actually just really, really simple. And then we applied the pops of color through furniture and what have you. And that's it. That's our presentation for you today. So we've got plenty of time here yet for some Q&A. If there is anything, we are happy to discuss.
Thanks for that. If anyone has any questions, feel free to share them in the chat. I'm curious what, did Visser maybe have an interest in, if they built the original building, what was their sort of level of interest in seeing how it was transformed?
Yeah, I mean, Andrew, you're 100% right. They did build the original building. And, you know, from the outset, the client honed in on them quickly. Visser knows that they were not my top choice to do the project. You know, at that time, you know, to be fair, I saw presentations that I thought were more realistic, and Visser knew the building, and they brought forth a perspective that was different than everyone else. And they turned out to be just fantastic. They brought value to what we did beyond what I could have dreamt. So, you know, I am always happy to be wrong, but they were the #1 pick of the client. And I mean, it's obvious they built the existing building, so the client felt that they would know what pitfalls were ahead. But it was actually kind of funny because, you know, there were so many things that happened that they didn't know were there. So I think that that's just sort of a time-based thing where a building degrades over time and gets used. You don't know that your ballast on the roof has too sharp of an edge on it, and it's destroying the ballast and creating leaks everywhere. You know, they didn't know that, you know, their air handling units were, you know, more than 50% not functioning. You know, they tried their best, but there were a lot of unexpected qualities. You know, throughout the pandemic, I'll tell you, several times over the course of the project, you know, we were nearly shut down completely because Northpoint found that they could work at home very, very efficiently. I think we all know it. Things felt very dire at many points, but I can remember the exact moment where I heard the CEO say, let's shelve this project for 2 weeks. You know, it's more than we expected it to cost. It's just too much, and materials weren't being made available to us. It was a lot, but they persevered. And, you know, the story that Chuck, the CEO, tells to this day was, you know, he'll kind of pat me on the back, but he'll hit me more than anything. It's just, I'm glad you stuck with it. I'm glad you put up with us, because, you know, we needed to believe to get this project done. And that's really what carried it through, was Visser's steadfast quality in being able to accurately predict cost and to be honest about it. That was just a fantastic, you know, team quality experience that, you know, you don't get that often in your career. But also trying to find ways to be able to huddle and say, how can we support this client, feel more confident about this project happening? That was great. So I think without them building the original building, you know, I don't know what the story would be today. Because I got to admit, I mean, the CMs that came to the table were just fantastic. Grand Rapids has amazing contractors. So it was all just really interesting. The people that were on the project needed to be on the project, and it got done. So,
well, there's no more questions in the chat. I want to thank you both for your time and energy in sharing this project. It's really beautiful. It's definitely a transformation from what was there.
Yeah.
I'll do some quick plugs and then can let everyone go a little early. So next week, our COTE committee, we have our next session in the 2030 series on daylighting and integrated lighting. The following week on Tuesday as well, high performance systems we're covering. And then our next Framework for Design Excellence session is going to be on October 7th, and that is covering design for change. So thanks everyone for your attendance today, and we look forward to seeing you at future events.
Cool.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.